the businesses that don't think about and very quickly think about the adoption of AI and the adoption of Gen AI are at the risk of going out of business. And so, the jobs are on the line because the business might close down if it can't keep up, and it can't keep up and stay competitive.
Please join me in welcoming Alexandra Mousavizadeh. Alexandra has spent the last 25 years ranking and quantifying complex societal and political forces. She started her career at Moody's, then Morgan Stanley, later became CEO of ARC Ratings, and then director of the Prosperity Index. Alexandra was a founding partner at Tortoise Media, where she ran Tortoise Intelligence, the index and data businesses. There she was the architect of the groundbreaking Global AI Index, the first benchmark to track the strength of national AI ecosystems. Most recently, Alexandra is the founder and CEO of Evident. She holds a degree in economics, mathematics, and game theory from the University of Copenhagen. Welcome, Alexandra. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having me, Vahe.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Let me just talk a little bit about the Evident AI Index, because it's a very interesting index. And can you just give us a summary of what you're looking at this index and what you're achieving with it?
As you mentioned, we built the first, actually, if I step back a bit and look at when we released the Global AI Index when I was at Tortoise Media back in 2019, that was the first index to publicly rank nations on the strength of their AI ecosystems. We ranked just shy of 70 countries and took a really close look at sort of who was leading and why. So the US versus China debate, where does Europe sit? What are the nations elsewhere that are doing important work and funding AI domestically, and AI talent and R&D and infrastructure? And sort of who was leading of the bigger nations and who was leading in sort of the smaller nations, which was incredibly interesting to see sort of how nations were thinking about and organizing themselves around not only the development of AI, but also the support of the deployment of AI and the commercialization of AI. And so that brought me and my team deep into the weeds of measuring something quite nebulous, which is AI, defining it and working out what are the cornerstones of creating a strong national AI ecosystem. And in a couple of years ago, there were many businesses that came to us and said, we would like to see where we sit on our AI ecosystem in our business and how we compare to peers and what are the best in class doing. And that led to setting up Evident, which we launched just 2 years ago, and spent some time working on that index for businesses. We started with banks, and I can get back to sort of why we did that. And then released the index, the first index publicly ranking banks on their AI maturity, which was released in January last year, so just 14 months ago. We then doubled the size of the coverage to go to 50 banks in total. And the second iteration of the Evident AI Index was released in November, and it's now on an annual cadence. But essentially, it is a measurement of how strong and how far each of the banks are in their AI capabilities. And we look at sort of what are the drivers of that, and why is it that the leading banks are leading, and why is it that those that are lower down in the index are lagging, and what can one learn from that, and is there a blueprint for AI maturity success and building AI capabilities, and what is the sequence in which, if you're starting on this journey, what is a good way to approach it, and what's the sequence of building up a strong business when it comes to AI capabilities. The last thing I would say is that it was also not only to emerge as a sort of global standard benchmark on AI adoption, but also to create much more transparency in this adoption process and the adoption journey, because it has been such a black box for many years, a lot of experimentation, a lot of different thinking, whether you're sort of US bank or European or you're in Asia, different approaches to how to go about it. So the index also provides that insight into the many pathways you can take as a business in terms of organizing around solid and swift AI adoption.
You brought up this topic of different regions thinking about it slightly different. And when I looked at this index, I saw that North American banks continue basically to dominate. I think they had six out of the top 10 positions. And there were only two from Europe and then two from Asia, and none from the UK, if I remember it correctly. So why do you think is that way?
The North American banks definitely dominate in the index. As you said, 6 out of the 10. If you look at the top 20, it's 12 out of the top 20 that are North American. And if you double click on just the sort of top 10 and look at the leaders there, JP Morgan, Capital One, and RBC, and you look at the scores, they're really far ahead in their AI leadership and building AI capabilities. And just between the January release and the November release, the scores just increased for the leading banks, i.e. they were doubling down, they were already ahead, and that lead gave them an additional, edge when it sort of came to pulling ahead, and they are, increasing their scores and creating more of a gap between themselves and the rest in the index. And so the question, we obviously, when we ran the index first, and it was interesting to see that the North American banks were leading, but also the data, we've got a lot of historical data there. It was very clear the reasons why. The North American banks were very much ahead of their European counterparts when it came to making a clear, distinct, and expressing a clear, distinct vision for the bank being AI first. So Jamie Dimon, as an example, 6-7 years ago, came out and said, we are going to be a tech company. We're going to be AI first, and we're going to reorganize ourselves as a tech company and drive a innovation mindset and a structure and infrastructure and a talent acquisition strategy as if we were a tech company, where many of the other banks have looked at the emergence of AI, 5-6 years ago and said, this is great, but we're going to view ourselves as a bank using tech to just become a better bank. And I think the distinction in that mindset is between those that are leading and sort of those that are a bit further down the index is that early out the door, reconfiguring the bank right away and doubling down on building a really strong talent stack in the bank has led to that leadership. So what Jamie Dimon did was announce that JP Morgan was going to be AI first, established a research lab led by Manuela Veloso, which is now 250 strong research team that services across the bank and helps scale AI production and across the bank. And then he has also reorganized the sort of senior leadership team and pulling up AI capabilities and AI strategy thinking to the top of the bank. So he's created a central system in addition to a federated system. So decisions around organizational infrastructure and priorities sit centrally, but actually there's also distinct capabilities in the lines of business where there's strategies that are specifically focusing on whether it be wealth management or on the investment banking side or where it might be. So you have both a centralized and a federated system. And that is sort of very much the character. If you look at the top 3 banks, they have that in common. They're very strong on their focus and the way they communicate it. They've got a very strong AI talent stack. They're very advanced on their innovation metrics, and we look at AI research, we look at patents, we look at partnerships, we look at what the bank is investing in terms of AI companies and how they bring those capabilities on board in the bank and use them. Partnerships with universities is actually incredibly important when it comes to AI adoption, because it's a funnel for talent. It's an eye on what's going on in this AI startup community. It's a place where you can really source what's going on the cutting edge. And then, of course, partnerships with big tech. So the big banks will have partnerships both with IBM and Microsoft, but also with Google and so on. And those many partnerships, each of them do different things, But that's also sort of one of sort of the signposts of a lot of maturity and capability, that you both have the talent to build in-house, but you're also looking to buy and acquire capabilities from partners that are really far advanced in their AI capabilities. So we could see, you look at those leading banks, they're strong on talent, strong on innovation, strong on leadership, and they're also very strong on the transparency of their responsible AI agenda, because they're servicing, clients that will be interested in this because they're making a very forceful statement that they're using AI. So everyone wants to know that it's being used in a responsible manner. I would say that pillar in the index is the one that is weighted the least because it's a very nascent area of reporting. So it only has, weight of 10% in the index.
The transparency.
Yes, transparency of responsible AI.
So many topics that you touched on, which opens many, many interesting questions. I think the one that comes first into mind is you said they had an advantage because they started earlier with having this clear vision. So how difficult is it now for another company to catch up, actually? Is that even possible? Can you catch up at this point, or is it just over?
No, I would say that, when we can see just what's happened in the last 12 months, that there are lots of banks that are positioning to catch up and are actually moving very quickly. But it is very clear that if you're organized already with traditional AI before we saw the release of ChatGPT and now all of the Gen AI capabilities becoming available for the banks. If you look back and you look at the banks that were already organized well to adopt traditional AI in the banks, that they were sent up with centralized inventory oversight, so you could see, how many use cases there were in the pipeline and in production, a way in which you can prioritize them, a return on investment assigned to these use cases. If that organizational structure was there, then it wasn't that hard to then add in and add on Gen AI. And then you're already set up with a system that can help identify the ideation process and moving that into production. The banks that didn't have that system set up in-house are now needing to set that up, because you're not only looking at traditional AI use cases, you're now also looking at the hundreds of use cases for Gen AI. So if you didn't have a centralized system and a way in which you could map it and prioritize it, doing that now is something that takes time. But we're seeing that, of course, there is also an advantage to be a second mover, right? You're seeing a lot of the big banks have tested out AI, and Bank of America has built a great, but it's time-consuming Erica chatbot. And with that comes a lot of thinking and a lot of organizational, strategy and structure. But then if you're a bank about to embark on sort of what might your, equivalent be, there are lessons that are learned for sure, and you could probably cut that time down and not spend 7 years on it, but you might just need to spend 1 year. So there is an advantage being a second mover in this, because you can sit back and you can say, okay, so what were the strategies that led to the best outcomes? If we don't need to build it in-house, what are the best tools with which we can use to buy it and get to similar outcomes? And I would also say, so there is that. There is the challenge is always the talent side, because if you are already seen by the outside world and AI talent to be a bank that is prioritizing AI, that has already a lot of strong talent, research hub, is organized well, so your use cases don't get stuck somewhere in the quagmire of moving through production for a number of reasons doesn't get there. AI talent wants to work on interesting problems that then get put into production and have impact. And so if you are proven to be able to do that, that is a very attractive aspect if you're looking to hire the best AI talent. If you're just embarking on it, AI talent will be like, well, we've got a lot of options, right? We could go to big tech, we can go to pharma, we can go to consultancy, we could go to academia. We don't have to go to a bank. So we want to go to a bank that has, its ducks in a line and have mature organizational setup, so we can be successful.
One question that comes to mind is how important is research actually, because you emphasized the importance of it, but at the same time, I feel like if you read papers like the emergent abilities of large language models, it seems very often that they're stumbling into things rather than actually predicting what we would like to achieve and then working towards that goal. And there are a lot of reasons for that. But I'm asking myself now with this generative AI and these very large language models, like how important would it be to research in this field rather than just apply it? And application is very, very difficult in itself. But would a bank actually really need a research department like a DeepMind or a OpenAI or Anthropic, or how would you see that?
I think the answer is not for large language models specifically, because that is impossible to develop in-house given the compute power and the data training set that you would need to develop that. So all the banks are definitely buying that from outside, those capabilities, either from, depending on what your use case is, but from OpenAI, from Mistral, Falcon, Llama, all of that. So everyone's testing and wouldn't build that in-house. But I do think that when you look at the value of research in a bank and what is the ROI on the research labs, the way that most banks, if they have a research lab, the way that they structure it is a 70-20-10 breakdown. So 70% would be applied research. So the research team embedding with the lines of business and asking, what are your current problems and how can we help solve them? So, and sometimes that research is about adopting Gen AI, and bringing it inside the bank and using large language models. There are all kinds of areas of research where, to help embed that, research around your data lakes and your platforms that you need to have improved, and the way that you refine it and the tools that you use for that, where the, research, available to a bank, done by a bank, and you have it to hand, becomes very handy because that helps you scale AI across and Gen AI across the bank. But so the 70% is typically applied AI. So what is the problem? Not necessarily only on Gen AI, but lots of traditional AI problems where it's targeted and pointed towards a specific problem and a specific use case. Then you've got 20% that is the research team that would say, well, hang on a second, what are the problems that are coming down the line that we think we're pretty sure we're going to face in 2 to 3 years' time, and how can we address that head on right now with the research, so the bank is ready and we're ready with the right and appropriate and relevant research. And then there's the last 10%, which is blue sky thinking. Or let's try all sorts of things that we find interesting because we have particular talent, and then we do blue sky thinking and do that. So I would say that maybe today, if you were to start a research lab, you might not need the blue sky thinking, but it is very attractive for the leading AI talent. If you're coming in with a PhD or you've worked in big tech or elsewhere on a particular problem, that is quite attractive that you have a place where there's a little bit of room to do some blue sky thinking still, because AI talent would like to come in, maybe do 2 years, maybe 7 years, but also will know that they are going to maybe not stay in the bank forever, and then be able to showcase some of that research that they've done for the bank and also outside, presented at conferences, research papers that have been cited, so they can go out and they can have a career elsewhere where their research has been surfaced and it's very visible. So that is one of the reasons that the banks do this. And then it's also really, the research is also to help deduplicate what happens in the lines of business. So if you have problems that are quite similar, and I think this is something actually the CEO from BNY Mellon just said in the earnings calls the other day, we want to make sure that we don't have duplication in the lines of business. And that's one reason to centralize, and they've just set up a 100-man strong central AI hub at BNY to try and avoid the duplication. And that also spills into the research area, that you then you surface what are the problems in the lines of business, and then you have a central area, central hub that does that research that then can be applied across the bank. So a lot of arguments for having that research lab is that you can scale AI at speed across all lines of business, and that you avoid duplication.
You emphasized a lot the need of AI talent, but I also saw an interview that you gave, and there you had this quote where you actually emphasized the need for proper contact management and data labeling efforts, right, for an effective AI implementation. And do you think that data labeling, I mean, I would assume that content management is rather solved. I hope so, at least. But do you think that data labeling is still a topic nowadays, or with Gen AI not so important anymore?
I think that I mean there are companies that do get flagged today around data labeling and just sort of the labor aspect of that, underpaid, and there's a lot of content that's quite difficult and has led to sort of mental health issues. Data labeling is very important to run AI. I mean, with the way that the large language models are trained on the vast data set, the data labeling aspect there is maybe a bit less pronounced, but data labeling is certainly taking place for to run AI effectively on it, and there's still data labeling is still needed. So there's that aspect of the labor, and we were talking before about the sort of the war on talent is one thing, sort of how as a business are you attracting the best talent, and what are the components that you need to have in your business to attract the best talent. And that war on talent is only intensifying with the need for chief AI officers, a need for strategic thinking for across the business to find people that are really good technically and also really good strategically and understand the business and the business value of AI, and sort of how to invest in AI so it really gives that return on investment that everyone is expecting and the shareholders are expecting. So that's sort of one aspect of the war on talent. Sort of really, these roles are evolving and becoming more and more important, and the sort of complexity of them are increasing. So finding that talent sort of at the executive level is something that, there's definitely a war on talent there. But then also in the lines of business, technical talent, engineering is incredibly important still. You've got to have AI development talent and data and AI engineering talent and implementation talent and model risk, all the oversight and the governance roles. Your use cases can get stuck in sort of from ideation to production if governance and model risk teams are not fully and properly equipped with AI capabilities to really understand what it is that they're reviewing. So that's sort of one side of the talent war, and sort of salaries go up. The demand for AI talent across the board is only going up. So that war is going to only intensify. On the data labeling, I mean, so there's then the sort of the labor side of AI production and AI deployment, and that is where that data labeling, comes in, and sort of what is the sort of that flip side of producing all of this AI, right? That is where that comes in, and then there's also that impact on jobs and impact on society, and as many have been talking about, sort of what it's going to lead to in terms of jobs that are going to be lost, and what kind of Jamie Dimon said, 6 months ago, that it could lead to significantly reduced work week, down to 3.5 days, a week is sort of what we could anticipate, given what AI and Gen AI in particular can solve for us and take away some of the sort of more rudimentary work, and sort of really can augment what we do. And that debate is a hotly debated topic. Is AI just going to actually just create more jobs and actually not reduce our workload because we're going to find other things to do? And then there's also the argument that the businesses that really harness Gen AI are going to get better and faster, and the analysis is going to get better, and their analysts are going to get better. So that just means they're going to win market share, which means that they're going to add to, they're going to add people to their organization rather than lose it. So I think my view is that the businesses that don't think about, and very quickly think about, the adoption of AI and the adoption of Gen AI are at the risk of going out of business. And so, the jobs are on the line because the business might close down if it can't keep up and it can't keep up and stay competitive. And if other banks or other businesses are onboarding it and becoming faster and better and giving better services and winning market share, then and that is the competitive edge of our time. So I think it really is a question of laggards of the adoption process are at the risk of going out of business.
It's a little bit of a weird time because we are somewhat overstating what AI actually is doing and then understating the effect sometimes, right? So overstating, as an example, I think Amazon is a good example with their Amazon Go shops, where essentially is very little AI and about 1,000 people in India sitting and labeling who took what and needs to pay what. So very overstated what it actually is. And then I think if you sometimes listen to Microsoft and OpenAI, they're somewhat understating the effect of AI by saying, oh, we'll just make humans better. But at the same time, they themselves let so many people go, and Google did, and other companies did. And actually, any company that has used AI meaningfully so far has mostly reduced staff. So at least in the short term, it seems to be an answer, unfortunately, that it might actually risk jobs, right?
There are a lot of businesses that are thinking about reducing their intake of analysts. Law firms are also reducing the intake of junior staff, and it's across the board, isn't across every sector. I do want to say though that being very close to the adoption process in the financial services sector, there is a slight tension between the expectation short term, what AI can do within the banks, and what is actually happening. And I think when you look back maybe 8 months ago, there was an expectation that everyone was going to be announcing end of last year and beginning this year, all of the use cases, the Gen AI use cases in production. But we haven't seen that yet. Jamie Dimon came out with his annual shareholder letter the other day, and there were 400 use cases announced, none of which were in Gen AI. And that's all just to say that it just is hard, right? It takes time. Your platforms and your data infrastructure has to be at a certain level to run AI on it. There's a lot of testing going on behind the scenes. So Gen AI use cases are pointed to the internal management and efficiency and productivity gains, the knowledge management, marketing and sales, and so on. And so, but even in those areas, it is harder to implement than anyone thinks. So there is this tension between shareholders expecting, these billions of dollars going into AI investment that is going to reap some outcome and return on investment and announcements of use cases going into production that are Gen AI based, and that actually it's not happening at the pace that is expected. So could we be going into an AI deployment winter where the expectations are falling, the reality is falling short of the expectations? And then, the board and shareholders are saying, well, actually, then don't invest so much in AI because we're not seeing the outputs and the outcomes that we were expecting. I don't think that that's going to happen. I think most of the organizations that we speak to are not halting investments in Gen AI and AI. They are keeping on it. But it is this tension of the taking longer and really understanding why it's not immediately being seen, and it's sort of creating these wins on productivity in the banks is something that everyone's going to have to grapple with, that we might not see that until next year or probably even 2026. Again, in the earnings calls that have been taking place from the banks, a lot of statements have been out saying we're probably not going to see the full value of the investments we've made in Gen AI until 2026. So that reality of how hard it is to actually adopt this. Then I think, once the data is in place, the testing has happened, there's been some real success stories, and there will be on Gen AI use cases and being put into production, then I think it's going to go very, very quickly. And I think then we're going to see a really rapid application that's not only internally focused, but it's also going to be externally focused.
Yeah, I think that these large language models demonstrate very, very interesting capabilities that are very appealing, obviously, and and you immediately can imagine what you can do with all these capabilities. But at the same time, the true value of AI is determined by the cost of the errors it makes, right? And especially in banking, the cost of an error can be very, very big. So you have to build a system that is resilient to to many different problems like wrong data, compute, and errors in compute, and so on and so on. So I feel like we are underestimating how much work is necessary to actually achieve a consistent return from a large language model, right? And on top of that comes something that you touched upon, which is, this deployment is, yes, of course, building the solution on this, but also the computational needs for the deployment should not be underestimated. What's your take there? Because one thing is, can you train a large AI model, right? But the other question is, even if you take one that is pre-trained, could you actually deploy it yourself, or is it just too big and only a few companies in the world can do that?
There's a lot of aspects to that. I mean, if we just sort of look at just the training of, when you're looking at OpenAI, you're looking at Anthropic, the cost of training and is immense. And then there's a whole environmental aspect here, right? Because the power that it needs, the cooling capabilities that need to go into this to, for the big data centers and to run this is also being debated now. We're so intent on barreling ahead on creating these capabilities, and there's a real sort of race going on among the large language model platforms and those who are developing it, because it is a little bit of this is a question, I guess, is it a winner take all, right? Your sort of error rate and your capabilities are going to come down, but it requires a lot more training and development of the large language models. And so whoever has the best capabilities are most likely going to be the ones that are going to get used by the businesses around the world. So there is that race. And then there's also the question of, but it's not necessary for everyone to use very, very sophisticated ChatGPT-5 when it comes by OpenAI. Some other models like, we are all following very closely, of course, what's going on in Mistral, Anthropic, you've got Llama and Falcon and so on, that are slightly smaller, but with some refining and fitting might just be fine for solving a particular problem that might be slightly smaller in a bank. And the banks are testing it all out. They're saying, look, we've got these 500 different types of use cases, and they might just not all need an OpenAI capability. They might just be absolutely fine with some other solution that is open source, by the way, right? That you can then fit into your own private data pool. And a lot of banks are experimenting with that. Where it shakes out, we don't quite know, but the experimentation of using the open source ones to fit it onto your own data is being tested because it is cheaper. And then the other advantage is that you're using it on your own private data set, right? And there's no data leakage, and there's a whole question around privacy that especially the banks face. So that's an added advantage to do it that way. I know that OpenAI is definitely plugging that issue with ways in which they're working with businesses, but those using smaller models that you're bringing in-house and sort of retrofitting or sort of fitting in to meet your needs is definitely what's being explored and tested right now.
So you see the role of open source is vital for banking also, right?
Not only for banking, but that there is that on offer, right? So it's accessible also for smaller companies that might not be able to afford the sort of bigger Microsoft OpenAI package, but but open source is definitely vital. I mean, there is a question of the cost of fitting it, but every organization will have different needs.
One other point that you touched upon very, very slightly is about capabilities of these language models, and everybody's talking about AGI, especially since Elon Musk predicted that we might soon achieve this. And I know that you have a special view on this. What's your view on AGI?
It's a hotly debated topic. AGI is hard to define and much debated. And interestingly, the relationship between OpenAI and Microsoft is one in which where the commercial arrangements between the two will end when OpenAI reaches AGI. And Satya Nadella has been asked, and has Sam Altman, around, that is a big deal for the two companies, that their relationship would end once that has been reached. But when asked how to, when has that been reached and who gets to define it, there's very little clarity on that, and it is because it is hard to define. And if you go back 10 years ago, the founder of Anthropic was talking very eloquently about it the other day in a podcast with Ezra Klein about, the definitions of AGI 10 years ago of a capability surpassing human capabilities is AGI. So he was saying, well, actually, you could say that we probably reached, in that sort of narrow definition, we probably reached AGI. So what do we mean by AGI? Surpassing human capabilities on a number of areas, is sort of a slightly broader definition, and maybe we haven't reached it sort of at a sort of a general level. But I think that the goalpost might just be, constantly moving. In 2 years' time, we might say, oh, but AGI is just 2 or 3 years out. So Elon Musk also last week was saying, actually, it is, in my view, imminent. We're 18 months away from reaching AGI, but he didn't define AGI, so it's an easy one to wiggle out of. Whereas Jan LeCun was saying, no, it's much, much further away, but obviously with a sort of a different assumption what AGI is. But I would say maybe it's not actually worth trying to define AGI, and maybe we have actually already reached it. I think in the narrow definition, we definitely have. And so if we stop trying to define AGI and just looking at sort of where we are and where the issues are, I mean, AGI is also often being brought into the conversation around existential risk. So you've got the capability that, by far surpasses human capability. If it's very narrow, it's not a problem. It is if it's general and plugged into physical infrastructure, it's a problem, because then it's something that we may not be able to control, and inadvertently there's a problem created by an AGI that's fully sort of plugged into all our systems, and we might have a problem. And I'm not saying that it's definitely a non-zero risk. We need to be thinking about that, but maybe we should try and not do it through the prism of what is AGI, but really look at it in terms of when are the capabilities. So when are we starting to see these capabilities and plugging it into physical infrastructure and reaching what I would say is more important is agentic AI. So the agent AI that is able to do many prompts in a sequence and act on them, right? That is what we need to look out for. So I would say that would be something I would be watching for, agentic AI.
Yeah, you brought an important point when you said maybe narrow intelligence is not a problem. But do you really think that it's not a problem? Because we can easily design a system that is not very intelligent at all, maybe a sorting algorithm on Twitter, now X, that can have a huge influence on society, just on a very simple algorithm. Now, even narrow intelligence is not simple, right? So it is actually much more complex than simple and difficult to understand. So there might be a lot of risks hidden in the current capabilities of AIs that we are not even aware of at this moment.
That is a very good point. I think you can wreak a lot of havoc with what we have today. Narrow AI, even if it's still in the foothills of development, there's a huge price that we as societies could be paying in our democracy and information and disinformation campaigns that can be really powered up with the capabilities that of AI as it stands today. So I would say that's absolutely a risk. I think that has been a risk for a long time, even with less capable AI. This is why I think there is a tension in the way that the UK government, the US government, and others are talking about what is needed from a regulatory perspective. And I think the issue is that they're focusing on the sort of long-term risks and how to put guardrails around. And again, back to this sort of AGI question. Whereas I think what we're missing here is the risks that are here right now. And what are the risks that are, where AI is already used in changing election outcomes and influencing people and creating tensions and much more, fractious debates across society. And we know it. We're seeing it unfolding, whether it's around sort of the Middle East, whether it's, domestically across, many countries where there's the, polarization is only increasing. And that's definitely with the help of, social media, AI-powered information campaigns, and also with the power that AI can now sound quite convincing, and it's actually completely made up. So it's not that I'm not concerned about that. I think that has to be addressed right now and right here with all of the ways that we know it can be addressed, but the willingness to address it is not there. For example, having these platforms be much more accountable for these kinds of campaigns, invoke the 230 article, which means that they are, they're not just a platform that can stand back and be neutral. They are responsible for what they put on their platform. I think that is a very hard thing to get through, but I think these are the kinds of debates that we need to have right now for the sake of our democracies and the sake of our societies. And then there's, of course, the debate around social media and the impact on mental health. And I'm sure that the listeners have been following the release of Jonathan Haidt's book on looking at sort of where the onset of Instagram and other social media channels has had a profound impact on mental health in a particular age cohort and those growing up with that and having access to that. And that is maybe less about AI as such and more about sort of what is it we give access to and should one age gate. But it is also about AI because that is faster, more pointed campaigns to people who are potentially vulnerable, and it has massive impact on mental health. So, I think we have real problems right now that we need to address.
I want to end with something good, not with only the problems. What's your prediction if you look at, you have done this Evident AI Index twice now, I think, and
Yes.
you did an annual cadence, but so it's difficult to talk about a trend with 2 data points. But if you would, what would you think is the trend pointing towards? Like more adoption of AI, and how would it hopefully positively affect society?
If you look at the trend just in what is being spent on AI and on Gen AI and on talent and the race that is only intensifying. So I cannot see that trend will change. I think that what an emerging trend that we're seeing is the performance on our index, or sort of our index aside, but the sort of the capabilities of the banks with the best AI capabilities. We're seeing, and we're starting to see this correlation with the bottom line, so stock price and with sort of various KPIs that we look at. But economic, financial performance will increase by the banks and businesses that really lean into investing in AI on all of the aspects that is needed to build a strong AI ecosystem in the business or the banks. That trend is also not going to stop. And I think that trend with the correlation between AI capability and bottom line performance is only going to increase, i.e. that correlation is only going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. Back to the point of, leaning into AI is going to, I think someone put it the other day, the winners are going to win more and the ones that don't might go out of business. But in terms of adoption, I think that we're just in the foothills of adoption. Everyone's, and especially with Gen AI. But I think once those sort of thorny questions and sort of infrastructure issues have been solved, I think we're going to see a huge acceleration of adoption and use, and it's going to be in every nook and cranny of banks and businesses, generally speaking. And I think it's 2, 3, 4 years from now, I think that these businesses will have changed profoundly.
Very, very interesting. I could continue for hours, but I think you have other things also to do, especially with the next index coming out soon. Thank you very much for your time and your insights. Maybe as a last point, if somebody's interested to finding you, how would they find you?
Well, always welcome input, comments, feedback. The best way to come and visit us on our website, evidentinsights.com, and anyone can drop me a line, Alexandra at evidentinsights.com, if you've got questions following on from this podcast.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this edition of Hybrid Minds. This podcast is brought to you by Cognize, the first of its kind intelligent document processing company, which automates unstructured data with hybrid intelligence and a data-centric AI platform. To learn more, visit cognize.com. And be sure to catch the next episode of Hybrid Minds wherever you get your podcasts.